The wide, smiling face of Sheikh Mohammed, the absolute ruler of Dubai, beams down on his creation. His image is displayed on every other building, sandwiched between the more familiar corporate rictuses of Ronald McDonald and Colonel Sanders. This man has sold Dubai to the world as the city of 1001 Arabian Lights, a Shangri-La in the Middle East insulated from the dust storms blasting across the region. He dominates the Manhattan Mang skyline, beaming out from row after row of glass pyramids and hotels smelted into the shape of piles of golden coins. And there he stands on the tallest building in the world, a skinny spike, jabbing farther into the sky than any other human construction in history. But something has flickered in Sheikh Mohammed's smile. The ubiquitous cranes have paused on the skyline, as if stuck in time. There are countless buildings half-finished, seemingly abandoned. In the swankiest new constructions, like the vast Atlantis Hotel, a giant pink castle built in 1,000 days for $1.5 billion on its own artificial island, where rainwater is leaking from the ceilings and the tiles are falling off the roof. This Neverland was built on the Never Never, and now the cracks are beginning to show. Suddenly it looks less like Manhattan in the sun than Iceland in the desert. Once the manic burst of building has stopped and the whirlwind has slowed, the secrets of Dubai are slowly seeping out. This is a city built from nothing in just a few wild decades on credit and ecocide, suppression and slavery. Dubai is a living metal metaphor for the neoliberal globalized world that may be crashing, at last, into history. Karen Andrews can't speak. Every time she starts to tell her story, she puts her head down and crumples. She is slim and angular and has the faded radiance of the once rich, even though her clothes are as creased as her forehead. I find her in the car park of one of Dubai's finest international hotels, where she is living, in her Range Rover. She has been sleeping here for months, thanks to the kindness of the Bangladeshi car park attendants who don't have the heart to move her on. This is not where she thought her Dubai dream would end. Her story comes out in stutters, over 4 hours. At times, her old voice, witty and warm, breaks through. Karen came here from Canada when her husband was offered a job in the senior division of a famous multinational. When he said Dubai, I said, if you want me to wear black and quit booze, baby, you've got the wrong girl. But he asked me to give it a chance. And I loved him. All her worries melted when she touched down in Dubai in 2005. It was an adult Disneyland, where Sheikh Mohammed is the mouse, she says. Life was fantastic. You had these amazing big apartments, you had a whole army of your own staff, you pay no taxes at all. It seemed like everyone was a CEO. We were partying the whole time. Her husband, Daniel, bought 2 properties. We were drunk on Dubai, she says. But for the first time in his life, he was beginning to mismanage their finances. We're not talking huge sums, but he was getting confused. It was so unlike Daniel, I was surprised. We got into a little bit of debt. After a year, she found out why. Daniel was diagnosed with a brain tumor. One doctor told him he had a year to live, another said it was benign and he'd be okay. But the debts were growing. Before I came here, I didn't know anything about Dubai law. I assumed if all these big companies come here, it must be pretty like Canada's or any other liberal democracies, she says. Nobody told her there is no concept of bankruptcy. If you get into debt and you can't pay, you go to prison. When we realized that, I sat Daniel down and told him, listen, we need to get out of here. He knew he was guaranteed a payoff when he resigned, so we said, right, let's take the payoff, clear the debt, and go. So Daniel resigned, but he was given a lower payoff than his contract suggested. The debt remained. As soon as you quit your job in Dubai, your employer has to inform your bank. If you have any outstanding debts that aren't covered by your savings, then all your accounts are frozen and you are forbidden to leave the country. Suddenly our cards stopped working. We had nothing. We were thrown out of our apartment. Karen can't speak about what happened next for a long time. She is shaking. Daniel was arrested and taken away on the day of their eviction. It was 6 days before she could talk to him. He told me he was put in a cell with another debtor, a Sri Lankan guy who was only 27, who said he couldn't face the shame to his family. Daniel woke up and the boy had swallowed razor blades. He banged for help, but nobody came, and the boy died in front of him. Karen managed to beg from her friends for a few weeks, but it was so humiliating. I've never lived like this. I worked in the fashion industry. I had my own shops. She peters out. Daniel was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment at a trial he couldn't understand. It was in Arabic, and there was no translation. "Now I'm here illegally too," Karen says. "I've got no money, nothing. I have to last 9 months until he's out, somehow." Looking away, almost paralyzed with embarrassment, she asks if I could buy her a meal. She is not alone. All over the city, there are maxed-out expats sleeping secretly in the sand dunes or the airport, or in their cars. "The thing you have to understand about Dubai is, nothing is what it seems," Karen says at last. Nothing. This isn't a city, it's a con job. They lure you in telling you it's one thing, a modern kind of place, but beneath the surface it's a medieval dictatorship. 30 years ago, almost all of contemporary Dubai was desert, inhabited only by cactuses and tumbleweed and scorpions. But downtown there are traces of the town that once was, buried amidst the metal and glass. In the dusty fort of the Dubai Museum, a sanitized version of this story is told. In the mid-18th century, a small village was built here, in the lower Persian Gulf, where people would dive for pearls off the coast. It soon began to accumulate a cosmopolitan population washing up from Persia, the Indian subcontinent, and other Arab countries, all hoping to make their fortune. They named it after a local locust, the Daba, who consumed everything before it. The town was soon seized by the gunships of the British Empire, who held it by the throat as late as 1971. As they scuttled away, Dubai decided to ally with the 6 surrounding states and make up the United Arab Emirates, UAE. The British quit, exhausted, just as oil was being discovered, and the sheiks who suddenly found themselves in charge faced a remarkable dilemma. They were largely illiterate nomads who spent their lives driving camels through the desert, yet now they had a vast pot of gold. What should they do with it? Dubai only had a dribble of oil compared to neighboring Abu Dhabi, so Sheikh Maktoum decided to use the revenues to build something that would last. Israel used to boast it made the desert bloom. Sheikh Maktoum resolved to make the desert boom. He would build a city to be a center of tourism and financial services, sucking up cash and talent from across the globe. He invited the world to come tax-free, and they came in their millions, swamping the local population, who now make up just 5% of Dubai. A city seemed to fall from the sky in just 3 decades, whole and complete and swelling. They fast-forwarded from the 18th century to the 21st in a single generation. If you take the big bus tour of Dubai, the passport to a pre-processed experience of every major city on Earth, you are fed the propaganda vision of how this happened. Dubai's motto is open doors, open minds, the tour guide tells you in clipped tones, before depositing you at the souks to buy camel tea cozies. Here you are free to purchase fabrics, he adds. As you pass each new monumental building, he tells you, the World Trade Center was built by His Highness, but this is a lie. The Sheikh did not build this city. It was built by slaves. They are building it now. All the guidebooks call Dubai a melting pot, but as I trawl across the city, I find that every group here huddles together in its own little ethnic enclave and becomes a caricature of itself. One night, in the heart of this homesick city, tired of the malls and the camps, I go to Double Decker, a hangout for British expats. At the entrance there is a red telephone box and London bus stop signs. Its wooden interior looks like a cross between a colonial clubhouse and the Raj and an 80s school disco, with blinking colored lights and cheese blaring out. As I enter, a girl in a short skirt collapses out of the door onto her back. A guy wearing a pirate hat helps her to her feet, dropping his beer bottle with a paralytic laugh. I start to talk to 2 sun-dried women in their 60s who have been getting gently sozzled since midday. "You stay here for the lifestyle," they say, telling me to take a seat and order some more drinks. All the expats talk about the lifestyle, but when you ask what it is, they become vague. Anne Wark tries to summarize it, "Here, you go out every night. You'd never do that back home. You see people all the time. It's great. You have lots of free time. You have maids and staff, so you don't have to do all that stuff. You party." They have been in Dubai for 20 years, and they are happy to explain how the city works. "You've got a hierarchy, haven't you?" Anne says. "It's the Emirates at the top, then I'd say the British and other Westerners. Then I suppose it's the Filipinos. Then at the bottom you've got the Indians and all them lot." They admit, however, they have never spoken to an Emirati. Never. No. They keep themselves to themselves. Yet Dubai has disappointed them. Jules Taylor tells me, "If you have an accident here it's a nightmare." There was a British woman we knew who ran over an Indian guy, and she was locked up for 4 days. If you have a tiny bit of alcohol on your breath, they're all over you. These Indians throw themselves in front of cars because then their family has to be given blood money, compensation. But the police just blame us. That poor woman. A 24-year-old British woman called Hannah Gamble takes a break from the dance floor to talk to me. I love the sun and the beach. It's great out here, she says. Is there anything bad? Oh yes, she says. One of them has noticed, I think with relief. The banks. When you want to make a transfer you have to fax them. You can't do it online. Anything else? She thinks hard. The traffic's not very good. When I ask the British expats how they feel to not be in a democracy, their reaction is always the same. First, they look bemused. Then they look affronted. It's the Arab way, an Essex boy shouts at me in response as he tries to put a pair of comedy antlers on his head while pouring some beer into the mouth of his friend, who is lying on his back on the floor, gurning. Later, in a hotel bar, I start chatting to a dyspeptic expat American who works in the cosmetics industry and is desperate to get away from these people. She says all the people who couldn't succeed in their own countries end up here, and suddenly they're rich and promoted way above their abilities and bragging about how great they are. I've never met so many incompetent people in such senior positions anywhere in the world. She adds, it's absolutely racist. I had Filipino girls working for me doing the same job as a European girl, and she's paid a quarter of the wages. The people who do the real work are paid next to nothing, while these incompetent managers pay themselves £40,000 a month. With the exception of her, one theme unites every expat I speak to: their joy at having staff to do the work that would clog their lives up back home. Everyone, it seems, has a maid. The maids used to be predominantly Filipino, but with the recession, Filipinos have been judged to be too expensive, so a nice Ethiopian servant girl is the latest fashionable accessory. It is an open secret that once you hire a maid, you have absolute power over her. You take her passport, everyone does. You decide when to pay her and when, if ever, she can take a break. And you decide who she talks to. She speaks no Arabic. She cannot escape. In a Burger King, a Filipino girl tells me it is terrifying for her to wander the malls in Dubai because Filipino maids or nannies always sneak away from the family they are with and beg her for help. They say, please, I am being held prisoner, they don't let me call home, they make me work every waking hour 7 days a week. At first I would say, my God, I will tell the consulate, where are you staying? But they never know their address and the consulate isn't interested. I avoid them now. I keep thinking about a woman who told me she hadn't eaten any fruit in 4 years. They think I have power because I can walk around on my own, but I'm powerless. The only hostel for women in Dubai, a filthy private villa on the brink of being repossessed, is filled with escaped maids. Mela Matari, a 25-year-old Ethiopian woman with a drooping smile, tells me what happened to her and thousands like her. She was promised a paradise in the sands by an agency, so she left her 4-year-old daughter at home and headed here to earn money for a better future. But they paid me half what they promised. I was put with an Australian family, 4 children, and Madam made me work from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day, with no day off. I was exhausted and pleaded for a break, but they just shouted, you came here to work, not sleep. Then one day I just couldn't go on, and Madam beat me. She beat me with her fists and kicked me. My ear still hurts. They wouldn't give me my wages, they said they'd pay me at the end of the 2 years. What could I do? I didn't know anybody here. I was terrified. One day, after yet another beating, Mela ran out onto the streets and asked, in broken English, how to find the Ethiopian consulate. After walking for 2 days, she found it, but they told her she had to get her passport back from Madam. Well, how could I, she asks. She has been in this hostel for 6 months. She has spoken to her daughter twice. I lost my country, I lost my daughter, I lost everything, she says. As she says this, I remember a stray sentence I heard back at Double Decker. I asked a British woman called Hermione Frayling what the best thing about Dubai was. Oh, the servant class, she trilled. You do nothing. They'll do anything. On my final night in the Dubai Disneyland, I stopped off on my way to the airport at a Pizza Hut that sits at the side of one of the city's endless, wide, gaping roads. It is identical to the one near my apartment in London in every respect, even the vomit-colored decor. My mind is whirring and distracted. Perhaps Dubai disturbed me so much, I am thinking, because here, the entire global supply chain is condensed. Many of my goods are made by semi-enslaved populations desperate for a chance 2,000 miles away. Is the only difference that here, they are merely 2 miles away, and you sometimes get to glimpse their faces. Dubai is market fundamentalist globalization in one city. I ask the Filipino girl behind the counter if she likes it here. "It's okay," she says cautiously. "Really?" I say. "I can't stand it." She sighs with relief and says, "This is the most terrible place. I hate it. I was here for months before I realized everything in Dubai is fake. Everything you see. The trees are fake, the workers' contracts are fake, the islands are fake, the smiles are fake, even the water is fake." But she is trapped, she says. She got into debt to come here, and she is stuck for 3 years, an old story now. I think Dubai is like an oasis. It is an illusion, not real. You think you have seen water in the distance, but you get close, and you only get a mouthful of sand. As she says this, another customer enters. She forces her face into the broad, empty Dubai smile and says, "And how may I help you tonight, sir? Despite all of this, Dubai is still a city of great potential, and I will always have a soft spot for it as the standard of living was by any means excellent. I do not oppose its success, in fact, I cheer it on." I was stating that the city has a big problem with identity, culture, arts and innovation, the things that matter and give a place its unique vibe. Most of the culture is highly exclusive to the locals, and in terms of arts, innovation and history, Dubai was only a small fishing town less than 50 years ago, so it's very understandable its development was purely economic and wasn't particularly touched by dramatic historical events or movements, and how could it in so little time? And the fear-based pacifier through harsh laws and fines they place on people strongly discourages artists. I'm confident that with time the globalized youth will take hold and figure it out, as classically framed by John Mayer. Please like, share and subscribe.